Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 1st of April 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on the screen at the moment, pause the video, so on and so forth. Right, let us go to the front line, and we can see that there are a number of pins across the front line. There is remarkably a blue pin there. It's quite unusual for this particular phase of the war. Thanks to JR, who's done the mapping update again. Total legend. The northern border is quiet, as in the pro-Ukrainian Russians have pulled back from there. But Ukrainians are still hammering Belgorod, or at least giving Belgorod, the city, some attention. I believe it is at the moment receiving some ordnance explosions heard in the Russian city of Belgorod, and various pieces of footage coming out from there. That's not unusual at the moment. That seems to be happening every day. I don't know what the objectives are there, what they're aiming for, and what they're using. I mean, there's lots of talk about Vampire multiple launch rockets that are being sent across and being taken out the sky by air defense. To be fair, if that's the case, I mean, that's relatively cheap multiple launch rockets. Relatively cheap rockets, probably causing the Russians to use some high value air defense missiles to take them out of the sky. So that's probably an asymmetrical scenario that the Ukrainians would very much like. Because when you multiple launch rocket systems generally have to be fairly close to be used, and since they're close to the front line, you're not really going to use air defense systems to take them out. But if you're using a multiple launch rocket system to fire into a city that's kind of effectively otherwise safe, I mean, it's not Belgorod, but it's within Russia, but it's also close to the Ukrainian border. So if you can use multiple launch rockets to get to Belgorod, then it's the sort of place where they would use air defense missiles to shoot those rockets down. And as mentioned, that's asymmetrical. Right, okay, the Kupiansk to Svat over to Kremina front line. You can see yet again there is no advance for the Russians anywhere along that line. And that is incredibly good news for the Ukrainians. It seems to have really stabilized. And indeed, Andrew Perpetua is showing some gains for the Ukrainians, possibly pushing back the Russians just east of Terny. We know that the Russians took this forest area, and then the next day the Ukrainians pushed them back, and then pushed them further back from where they had originally started. So that was good news for the Ukrainians. And then this area up here, which is, I presume, sort of a bit of a river valley, if you like. It's quite a very slight gradient there to either side. But yeah, the Russians have been pushed back from there, as according to Andrew Perpetua. I presume that's not just a rejig, but a push by the Ukrainians. Although we'll see. I don't know the details, so that is my speculation there. But good news to see some blue pins, especially around Terny, where the Russians had quite a bit of success previously. So we'll see how that develops over the next few days or so. Indeed, what do we have here? Ukrainian tank engages targets outside of Terny. Notably, there are 3 BMPs destroyed or abandoned. Visible in the rear, see the next post. 2 high-res losses in this sector are not visible, likely dating this to earlier in March. So more footage of destroyed vehicles, Russian vehicles. 3 BMPs. This is Gik, who helps out Andrew Perpetua. We found him on high-res satellite imagery before, would have missed it here otherwise. So this is the importance of getting hold of high-res satellite imagery. But anyway, we have the Russian oh no, this is Ukrainian tank operating on Russian targets, and that is no, it's not, because that didn't work at all. Yeah, well done me. We'll do that again, shall we? Okay, there we go. Right, so that is exactly, so Andrew Perpetua is therefore using that evidence to support his, Gik here working with him to support the movement of the map. So this is a counterattack, or at least this is a Ukrainian tank operating here, and therefore the Russians do not control this area if a Ukrainian tank is operating and hitting Russian targets there. So that's more likely to be now just grey zone, and therefore one would assume that if Deep State Map and Surat Maps don't change their map in the next sort of 24 hours, that would indicate that they're just a little bit wrong in that area. Okay, so we will move on, although I say we'll move on. ISW says Ukrainian forces recently advanced near Crimea amid continued positional engagements along the Kupiansk-Stratovo-Crimea line. Geolocated footage published yesterday indicates that Ukrainian forces recently advanced east of Terny. So that is that footage I was just showing you. Interesting that the ISW using GIC there as a source, and rightly so. There's some excellent geolocation by GIC with as part of the team. Andrew Pepechi's team there. So anyway, moving on past Bilohorivka and the Seversk front line, and no movement there. And then we get to Bakhmut, where according to Deep State Map and Surat Maps, there are some gains for the Russians just north of Ivaniska. And this is what I was expecting and worrying about, which is that high ground to the north of Ivaniska there. The Russians have seem to have filled in the gaps there where they had moved along just this initial part of the high ground. They seem to now be joining up this advance to what's taking place north of that, and I think that is a big worry. This is the most troubling area of Russian advance. I think Ivaniska itself is less important because it sits below that high ground, and it's just a bit of a kill box. And so in order for the Russians to really take advantage of, or for them to gain any extra control around here, they really need to take that high ground, and that's exactly what they appear to be doing, as according to those two mappers. So slightly worrying there. We go to the ISW. It just talks about there being positional engagements, no advances, or at least no confirmed advances from the ISW, although there are Russian claims to advances in that area. If we go on to my sources, we have Surat Maps here saying, and this is a pro Russian mapper talking about that high ground north of Ivanivska. So that's exactly where we just were. The claim here is Ukrainian Russian war, day 767 situation north of Bakhmut. During the last 3 days, the Russian army took control over the first trench line southeast of the Canal micro district and new positions at Mount Baba. Moreover, Russian troops entered the forest adjacent to the micro district. On the other hand, Russian forces have failed in their attempts to increase the buffer zone around Ivaniska, where Ukrainian drones have managed to destroy several Russian mechanized vehicles. And indeed, there is this footage that I kind of sort of shared with you this morning on my hits and losses videos. Lots of huge craters around here with a number of Russian vehicles lost near Ivaniska. So that is a challenge for the Russians. They are losing vehicles hand over fist at the moment in a number of different places on the front line, but as ever, that is met with marginal gains for the Russians quite often, and then the Russians are arguably somewhat, I guess, buoyed by that, and it leads to them thinking that that is the correct way forward, which is just throw equipment and humans at taking very small areas of land. I'm just trying to get this. Yep, there we go. So that is, those vehicles are lost on that main highway going in north of Ivaniska there. So interesting. So that's the T0504. That is what that road is there, evidently, or at least one presumes. That was one of the major roads going into Bakhmut, and you can see it's not easy to travel on at the moment, that's for sure, and just huge amounts of vehicles lost there. This would suggest that, I mean, we have heard that the Russians have fire control over the road coming in from the west, and so the Ukrainians are finding it very hard to supply any troops they might have in Ivanivska, and they don't really like, by all accounts, fighting in Ivanivska because it is something of a kill box, I presume, for both sides. But likewise, the Russians struggling along the road as well, and losing an awful lot of equipment. So real trouble for the Russians in terms of the equipment they've lost. That in that video, there are 4 armoured vehicles lost in that short space. Okay, and now we're going to come on down south past Klishchiivka and Kurdimivka, where there has been no movement for some time, and all the way to Avdiivka, which it seems somewhat stabilized. Badichi, Semenivka, Olivka, Tonyenka, no changes to the mappers there, although there was some yesterday. Let's go and look at the ISW to begin with, and we will say that it says that geolocated imagery published yesterday indicates Russian forces recently marginally advanced northwest of Tonyenka in a mechanized assault that Ukrainian forces defeated. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about. I've referenced it both today and yesterday, but we're going to put a little bit more meat on the bones for the claims of what happened in this assault at Tonyenka, where the Russians appear to have lost a massive amount of equipment. But it is supposedly the biggest attack they have put forward since they started attacking Avdiivka. So and you remember those huge losses they had. So we have to go back to the Terracon area here, where they were coming down behind the Terracon, I think. In behind here, and there were just those huge columns of vehicles that were being taken out. Well, this appears to be a similar tactic that they're using. Anton Gerashchenko here. So we've seen, well, you may well have seen the video evidence of all this. This is all caught on video, and then you can see it in these pictures where there are just 20 odd vehicles destroyed, absolutely taken out. So the video of the destruction of Russian armored convoy near the village of Tonyenka has appeared. The attack, in which the Ukrainians destroyed 20 pieces of equipment, is being called the largest in the entire war. The 25th Separate Airborne Brigade, Sichislav, of the AFU has published a video of the destruction of the Russian armored vehicles. The drone footage shows tanks and BMPs moving initially in a high-density formation, being hit by anti-tank missiles. So ATGMs were being used in concert with drones. They burn and stop. The video captured the destruction of 6 pieces of equipment. Ukrainian Project Deep State and Forbes called the attack the largest in the entire war. 36 tanks and 12 BMPs were involved. That's 48 pieces of kit. The Ukrainian forces destroyed or seriously damaged 20 vehicles, while the rest retreated. The battle took place in the western outskirts of Tonyenka, which is where Russian forces are trying to advance after the capture of Avdiivka. Russian war correspondent Yuri Kotinonok admitted losses of manpower and equipment, and actually confirmed that tanks and BMPs were sent into a minefield. Quote, "In no war can minefields be cleared by units. Russian commanders learn nothing." This is how Israeli military journalist Sergei Auslander commented on the destroyed column. So the first comment was from the Russian, and the second column, Russian commanders learn nothing, is by an Israeli journalist. As mentioned, we've got these images that show us vast numbers of pieces of equipment taken out. The ISW has a separate analysis on this attack at the beginning of their daily report, and actually I'm going to read through it because this is such a big event. So Ukrainian forces appear to have repelled a Russian battalion-sized mechanized assault near Avdiivka. This happened on the 30th, so actually 2 days ago. The first battalion-sized mechanized assault since Russian forces began the campaign to seize Avdiivka in late October. A Ukrainian servicemen reported yesterday that Russian forces, including elements of the 6th Tank Regiment, committed 36 tanks and 12 BMP fighting vehicles to a large mechanized assault near Tonyenka. Geolocated imagery published on the 31st shows a large number of destroyed and damaged Russian armoured vehicles and tanks along the road northwest of Tonyenka. The Ukrainian servicemen stated that Ukrainian forces destroyed 12 Russian tanks and 8 IFVs, including. So this would be the day where the General Staff reported 20 tanks being lost, and we wonder, it's really, does the General Staff, are they accurate? That many tanks in one day? Well, one attack lost 12, and then there's just 8 more from the rest of the front line, and then this then supports the justification that. Well, this is justification that those General Staff figures are at least largely correct. Anyway, it's 12 tanks and 8 IFVs in the assault. Noted that the frontal assault failed to break through the Ukrainian line. This appears to be the first report of any elements of the 90th Tank Division participating in assaults following the Russian seizure of Avdiivka. And ISW previously assessed that the elements of the 90th Tank Division, alongside other Russian units and formations, likely represent a sizable, uncommitted operational reserve that the Russian military command can commit to continue and intensify efforts to push west of Avdiivka. The elements of the 6th Tank Regiment appear to have failed in their March 30th attack near Tonyanka, however, suggesting that elements of Russia's uncommitted operational reserve near Avdiivka may be too degraded or otherwise unable to lead further Russian advances westward in the short term. Right, this is important. The reason why I'm spending a bit of time on this is because if they are committing reserves to Avdiivka, to this Tonyanka area, and have been absolutely blitzed there, and let's just show you kind of where, again, Gick has done a geolocation of each of these vehicles. So this is his geolocated image there. I'm going to put that in to our map just to give you the general area where these were lost. So this is on the very edge of the Russian control. And again, this is what Suriyat Maps does, which is the Russians are there, therefore they control it. And of course, they got absolutely hammered there. And the other mappers don't agree that that's under Russian control. It's most certainly grey zone, where the Russians have moved into it and then been absolutely spanked. I presume in that corner there. But anyway, this is really significant because these were previously uncommitted vehicles that were kind of operational reserves, and they've been spanked here. Then the question is, what stocks, what reserves do Russia have to continue this war in large scale maneuvers? I mean, do they, listen to kind of Elon Musk. Obviously, we shouldn't listen to Elon Musk, but he's talking about, they'll lose Odessa, etc., etc. It's like they can't even get past Tonyanka without losing an absolute bucket load of vehicles. How are they going to get to Odessa? What are the prospects for the Russians at the moment? Yeah, things are really tough for the Ukrainians. They desperately need manpower, and they desperately need munitions and equipment, and plenty of it. But given the desperation, the desperate situation that Ukrainians are in, they can still do this to Russia's biggest mechanized attack, arguably of the entire war, and repel the attack. And the attack fails, and the attack doesn't break through Russian lines, and there's no change to the map here. Well, Suriyat Maps changed actually yesterday as a result of that, but then I don't know that you can be particularly positive about Russia's prospects going forward here. Honestly, prove me wrong. Let me know what you think. The scale, says the RSW in continuation, of the Russian mechanized assault on the 30th is significant. Russian forces have not conducted a mechanized assault this large since the beginning of the Russian localized offensive effort to seize Avdiivka in late October 2023, when Ukrainian forces reportedly destroyed almost 50 Russian tanks and over 100 armored vehicles. On October the 19th to the 20th, so over 2 days, whether that was one assault or a number of assaults in the same general area. Remember, I was showing you all those images of and videos of that near that Terikon area. I think that's what they're referring to. If this wasn't the single biggest attack, then it's the biggest one since the beginning of this Avdiivka attack, and one of the biggest in the war. This is significant. Ukraine's ability to defend against that assault, particularly near Avdiivka, where Ukrainian forces have been forced to quickly withdraw to new defensive positions following the loss of the settlement, is a positive indicator for Ukraine's ability to defend against future large-scale Russian assaults and the expected summer 2024 Russian offensive operation. It's exactly what I was just saying, and there's the idea, well, what can we learn and what can we apply to predictions about what might happen if the Russians really do have a large summer offensive. Ukrainian officials, justifiably so, continue to warn about Ukraine's ability to defend against the expected summer Russian offensive effort in the face of ammunition shortages, manpower limitations, and delayed Western assistance. Ukrainian forces may have had to expend a significant amount of material to defend against the Russian assault near Tonyanka, highlighting Russia's ability to conduct assaults that force Ukraine to expend outsized portions of its already limited material and manpower reserves to defend against. Yes, so this is forcing Ukraine to expend resources in defending. However, it's well worth it. That's not like a bad thing, because they've cost the Russians hugely, or the Russians have cost themselves hugely. And so yes, that they will need continued assistance and resources to replenish those lost stocks. But my goodness, it's losing the Russians far more in terms of value and stockpiles and resources and manpower. Um, so yes, uh, Ukraine's demonstrated ability to skillfully defend against a large-scale Russian assault in a particularly critical part of the front, despite Ukraine's challenges, suggests that Ukrainian forces can achieve significant battlefield effects if they are properly equipped. So then you posit that. Well, now imagine they had just all the equipment they needed, all the equipment that many of us, you and I, are wanting Ukraine to receive. Imagine they had it all, right? What would have happened then? How much destruction we would have seen of Russian forces then? You know, it's this is great news, but at the same time, it's frustrating because it could have been even greater. The Russian command, and of course, this is going to really affect the morale of the Russian troops active in the area. We've already seen video evidence of a unit there refusing to go into battle in the Tonyenka area precisely because it's suicidal. The Russian command may be prioritizing the Avdiivka area in Donetsk. The Russian military command's willingness to commit a battalion's worth of tanks to an attack near Avdiivka indicates the assault was a priority effort. Yeah, I mean, it's a priori. Like, it seems to me obviously that this is one of the main vectors of attack. I mean, I was talking with reference to Andrew Perpetua's video the other night that there are kind of 4 areas of major activity. So you've got the Terny-Torska salient up here to the west of Crimea. You've got Bakhmut. You've got Avdiivka, and you've got to the south in Novomykhailivka up to Krasnohorivka, just up here. Those 4 areas are your main areas, and the question is, where are Russia going to focus and concentrate? Well, it seems fairly evident that they are at least majorly focusing on the Avdiivka salient. Personally, I wouldn't. I said the other day, if I was super cautious, I would actually go. Well, which I guess I am, because I'm like quite intuitively drawn, if I was a Russian commander, to taking this area and getting up to the Sherobets River and then digging in there. So you have a really good defensive line from which you can try and attack and see if you can get to the Oskil River eventually. I think Avdiivka, I don't think that moving too far to the west of Avdiivka, yes, there's Pokrovsk, but I think this is going to be quite difficult for the Ukrainians to do. So I think the other area I would concentrate is here. So I'd do the offensive part down here. So I think this would be an offensive move, and I would try and take Karakova, moving through Mariinka up to Krasnohorivka and through here at Novomykhailivka. I wouldn't bother with Avdiivka, and I would have just sat in defensively there. Move the Russians up to the Ukrainians back to behind this river. But I wouldn't really bother too much about this area that they seem to have been throwing vehicles at over the last couple of days. I don't think that's worth it. I just pretty much where they are now, leave it at that. Then take out your attacking resources from the Avdiivka sector and move them down to Novomykhailivka and try and bust through there. So bust through there, bust through up in Terny to make a defensive line there. But hey, I'm just a random sitting in an office in the south of England. Okay, so what else do we have? The Russian command may focus their forecasted late spring or summer 2024 offensive operation on western Donetsk in the hopes of building up Russian forces' steady but marginal advances in the sector. Yet they are steady, they are marginal, but they are also losing a lot. Ukrainian officials have recently warned that Russian forces are accumulating personnel along the Kharkiv-Luhansk axis near Bakhmut, near Avdiivka, and in western Zaporizhia Oblast. But ISW continues to assess that Russian forces will likely only be able to launch a large-scale offensive operation in one operational direction at a time due to Russia's own manpower and planning limitations. So it's interesting. So even though they are trying to push in these 4 areas, they're really only going to be able to practically push in a huge way in one of those areas. Okay, then going back to my sources. We have as well losses here. So this is in the Avdiivka area. 47th Mechanized Brigade uncovered a grim scene on the Avdiivka front. Numerous dead Russian soldiers and destroyed equipment. There's more footage of just huge amounts of kit and quite a few of these golf buggies or golf assault carts. I saw a tracked vehicle getting blown up, and it's not one I'd seen before. I first thought it was a golf cart. I thought, oh, that's a weird looking, and then it was on tracks. And like, so yeah, some interesting things that the Russians are using. Which again, the question is, are they using them because they've got no other choice, or are they using them because they're really decent things to use? Well, when you look at the destruction of some of these golf carts, you're thinking, yeah, it probably isn't. They probably aren't using them because they're the best things to use, because they're getting absolutely hammered. So among the wreckage were Russian assault golf carts, unarmored Chinese UTV Desert Cross 1000 3 quad bikes. Well, actually, no, those are two different things. The Desert Cross 1000 3 are golf carts, and the quad bikes are separate. But nonetheless, they're using both quad bikes, ATVs, and golf carts. So yeah, pretty challenging for the Russians in the Avdiivka area, that's for sure. Then we come down to Pervomaisky here, where there are some gains for the Russians, as according to Syriac maps. Here it's saying that the situation northwest of Donetsk during the last hours, the Russian army took control over the rest of the town of Vodyany, adjacent to the town of Pervomaisky, and troops took new positions and now control 85% of Pervomaisky. Most of the Ukrainian army has retreated to Netalove over there. So if we go to my map, you've got the whole of Vodyany now being under control of the Russians by them taking this northern part here, as according to Syriac maps, and also some more of Pervomaisky. And there's only that small area of Pervomaisky left not under Russian control. And that's assuming that Syriac maps has that correct. So that is what's happening there. Go back to the ISW to see what they say about the rest of Avdiivka. Yeah, we're going to come on to Novomykhailivka next. So if we come further south from Pervomaisky, past Novelska, past Krasnohorivka and Marinka, where again, no changes today. So particularly in the south of Krasnohorivka, it's been really stable recently, and Marinka, and I think that again is really good news for the Ukrainians. This is the area of the biggest worry for me, pretty much on the whole front line at the moment. So Novomykhailivka is an area where the Russians are pushing the most and having the most success. Sorry, not necessarily pushing the most, but having the most success. Andrew Perpetua and Syriac maps claiming that the Russians have made gains to the south there. That although Andrew Perpetua disagrees with Syriac maps over the control of the agricultural area here, so I think it's probably poultry farm or similar. There are piggeries and whatnot around this neck of the woods too, but yeah, the little bit of disagreement there. But they agree that the Russians are pushing to the west, and indeed, Andrew Perpetua has Russians having a control of a large tree line there. So that is problematic for the Ukrainians because they're looking like surrounding the rest of Novomykhailivka, certainly from the south. Syriac maps, I don't think has anything on here, but we do have EJ Shahid doing a geolocation. So the 79th Air Assault Brigade of the Ukrainians using an FPV to destroy a Russian armored personnel carrier, and infantry southwest of Novomykhailivka, Donetsk region with drones. So again, Russians possibly making advances, but at the same time losing equipment and personnel in so doing. And this, I don't know why it does that. Annoying. Let's plug that in again, and there we go. So, yep, that is the very extent of the Russian gains there, according to Andrew Perpetua, and that is geolocation of a Russian APC getting blown up there by the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian drone operators. So, yep, that is, as I say, the most worrying area of the front line as far as I'm concerned. Then when we come to the southern front line, interestingly, there is some movement, as according to Syriac maps, although I don't seem to have any tweet about this. Sometimes the tweets take many hours to come through. But this would be just consistent gains to the west of Verbove. As I've said many times before, there's a big difference between control in this area between the mappers. Andrew Perpetua and Deep State Map still has the Surovikin line under the grey zone and not under control of the Russians, whereas Syriac maps has Russians advancing quite a bit to the northwest of there. I would assume that this is, I doubt there'd be any Ukrainians here, but it's just whether the Russians definitely control it. I assume Surret Maps has got wind of at least some Russian activity over here, and that probably supports, probably supports all of this area being a grey zone. But it's difficult to say whether Russia definitely control areas. You have to kind of see things over time. What the ISW says of the area is nothing in Velika Novosilka. Here we have, yes, about this area, Robotina Verbova, no confirmed changes to the frontline position. Engagements continue near there, according to the ISW. Ukraine's Southern Operational Command reported that Russian forces are taking advantage of changing weather conditions in southern Ukraine to increase their aerial reconnaissance by using more than 200 reconnaissance drones per day. Holy cow. Ukraine's Southern Operational Command spokesperson Humenyuk stated that Russian forces are limiting their use of armoured vehicles when conducting assaults near Robotina. So interesting that the Russians are not using large amounts of mechanized equipment when attacking here, but they are deciding to do so when attacking elsewhere. And I think there are very localized differences between how they do their attacks. I don't know how much is doctrinal, how much is just defined by the contexts to each of these places. But nonetheless, they're not using too much mechanized equipment there. Then when we come down to Krynki and Dnipro River area, quite a lot to be said about here in the Institute for the Study War, although there are no changes to the mappers in mapping this area of Krynki. Just seems like the Ukrainians are holding on tenuously to control of some parts of that sector. Generally accepted that this area here is not controlled by the Ukrainians. This is grey zone. Ukrainians control the river delta area behind there, and then both sides kind of operate into here, but it's all fairly flat and pretty horrific. I've shown you videos of people walking around like the destroyed buildings here, and it's just it looks dangerous enough just walking. Nothing to do with drones and mortars and artillery, but just the wreckage and precariously walking amongst dangerous. It's like a very dangerous building site. Anyway, Homenyuk stated, says the ISW, that Russian forces are conducting 1 to 3 light infantry assaults without armoured vehicle support near Krynki per day. Homenyuk stated that the Russian Dnipro grouping of forces, which operates in the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, is transferring forces and equipment from occupied Crimea to unspecified areas, but are using very complicated logistics because Russian command has banned the use of obvious logistics routes at risk of Ukrainian interdiction. Humenyuk stated that Dnipro grouping of forces has a sufficient number of forces to conduct rotations, likely tactical level rotations, but the Dnipro grouping of forces have been unable to conduct successful assaults for a long time. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian servicemen operating in the Kherson direction said that there is currently a lull in Russian and Ukrainian activity and that both sides are only operating drones. The Russian servicemen reportedly claimed that Ukrainian forces have superior electronic warfare systems and coordination between drone and artillery units in the Kherson direction, rendering better results for Ukrainian forces in the area. That's generally accepted here, and it has been for some time. It's interesting listening to some analysis on this by Andrew Perpetua, talking about how other units outside of this area, elsewhere along the front line, want the kind of equipment that the Ukrainians have here. Magyar's birds. You've got, is it Robert Magyar, who's operating that very famous drone unit here? I think is fairly rich himself by all accounts, and has also got a really effective fundraising that they do just themselves as opposed to getting stuff from central government. And they get hold of really good jamming equipment and protective equipment. And so the Ukrainians in this particular area are effective at hammering the Russians, and the Russians have lost a huge amount of equipment here. That's not something that is replicated across the front lines, of course, and you have certain units that are trying to replicate that, but it's mainly the more successful units that are able to do that, because the more successful units get a higher profile online and people like them because they're successful, and then they're able to fundraise better. This is really interesting scenario whereby, and I wrote an article on this when I was out in Ukraine, talking about how, why is it that this is a crowd-funded war? Why is it that Ukrainian units are not getting everything from central government. So if we went to war, like when if any war that British or American or European forces have been involved in have been wars that have been prosecuted by government, and no one's done like fundraising for mechanized equipment or fundraising for weapons of war and then sending that out there. I know this is a time of internet that hasn't been previously when we've been at war to a large degree, but there is a big difference between how Ukraine are prosecuting the defensive war in Ukraine, and they are leaning very heavily on fundraising from international people who are, and domestic. There's an awful lot of fundraising going on inside Ukraine, who are people who are desperately concerned. And of course, Ukraine just don't have enough money. They're struggling. There's a massive deficit because their economy has been absolutely hammered by this war. And so ideally, they'd be paying for everything on a front line and getting Robert Madjer's group as much as they need and every other unit as much as they need. But they can't do that. They can't afford that. And they're not as dynamic in being able to do that through all the procedures and protocols. And so actually, units just go straight to the general public and say, help us get this stuff. We need this, order it, get it to there. And they can do that quicker than the central government can do that. And but that means that you have certain units are better at procuring equipment and fundraising than other units, and it's kind of like a postcode lottery, as we might call it, depending on what units are where and how they're operating. And some of those units, I guess it's a vicious cycle. The worse a unit does, the less famous they become, or the more infamous they become, and the more difficult it is for them to do fundraising, and so they get worse equipment, so they do worse. And vicious cycle and a virtuous cycle, and that could be a challenge going forward. Anyway, that's enough from me. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate your support. Hopefully this was of interest to you. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.